Krishna's description to Arjuna of the possibility of the annihilation of our spiritual life is very sobering. And all the devotees should take heed of his warning. And that is a wonderful shloka to read again and again, just to remind us that we are really never safe from delusion until our consciousness is completely anchored in God consciousness, which Yogananda would say was then in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So for most of us, that means we should beware. But even in our aspiration to climb to spiritual heights, there's bound to be some slips and falls. And Swami Kriyananda has these weekly commentaries on the Gita and the Bible, which we talk about in every Ananda temple around the world, except in India. Then we sort of make up our own titles. But so this passage from the Gita goes along with the title, Why Do Devotees Fall? And so Swami talks about that and writes about that. Why do devotees fall? And so the answer is pretty much what Krishna just told Arjuna. But then also we can say, what is a fall? What is a fall? A slip is not a fall. And how far can we fall? I mean, there is no eternal hell from which we can never emerge or re-emerge. So really it's all sort of relative. And when you think of climbing to the spiritual heights, we know we're going to fall down along the way. Just think of babies learning to walk. Usually they fall many more times before they ever make any distance whatsoever with their first step. When athletes, are trying to perfect their sport, they will have many, many failures and many losses along the way before they come to the top and become the top athlete of that field. And George Washington, American general, first president of the U.S., fought every single battle. He lost every battle that they fought until he won the last one, when the U.S. gained independence. But he kept showing up on that battlefield. Odds were against him. It was winter, they had no shoes, the whole story. But he kept showing up and finally won the battle, which gave them freedom. So that's what we need to do. We just don't quit. We keep showing up. And, Arjuna, Krishna says later, my devotee is never lost. And Sri Yukteswar tells Yogananda, the past of all men is dark with many shames, but all of us spiritual lives will improve with the right spiritual effort now. Guru Purnima is this week, and it happens to be on Guru Purnima, the one day of the year that the house of Lahiri Mahashaya in Varanasi is open. So many of us are going to Varanasi during the middle of this week. Also, some of us are staying here and having a kirtan and having other wonderful events. But speaking of Lahiri Mahashaya, most of you know he very much dictated deeper meanings of the Mahabharata to his disciples. And then Yogananda wrote commentaries on them, but mainly the allegory being that, our spiritual selves, ourselves are like nations unto themselves, and that we have, nation of citizens, many of them noble, spiritually aspiring, committed to finding God, good, selfless, peaceful, loving. But then we also have these citizens that are greedy and selfish and, only wanting the senses and pleasures and desires and attachments. And all of these are mixed in with ourselves and also within our chakras. And what Lahiri says is focus on the citizens that are noble, that are true, that reside in the upper chakras. That's why we always gaze up at the spiritual eye. Focus on the upper chakras, all the qualities, the spiritual qualities that we have within us. And do not pay attention or do not give energy to our lower citizens, our negative traits, our negative tendencies. Don't give them energy. And of course, we know at the beginning of the Mahabharata, Sanjaya must say what's happening on the battlefield. And he says, well, on the side of the Kauravas, there's so many warriors, there are too many to count. And of course, the Kauravas were representing worldly power. And the Pandavas were representing the devotees and the soul's aspiration to God. And he said, but on the Pandava side, they're so easy to count. There's so few here. And when you think of materialistic tendencies and all the desires we can have and all the restlessnesses and reasons to just draw outside ourselves, there's millions of them. And yet, when we get closer to God and ever closer to our spiritual goal, things become much more simple. It's like, I want to live in love. I want to experience peace. I want to see and commune with divine light. There are very few qualities, but they're reinforced with divine grace, and they are so powerful. Whereas all of our restless desires, there's so many of them, but they're weak and they cancel each other out. Like I may have a desire to be rich, but that counters the desire that I have to spend a bunch of money. So things like this, they cancel each other out. Swami says, like a bunch of kittens playing with the yarn ball, they can't really affect anything. And of course, there was the opportunity of Arjuna to decide if he wanted to choose Krishna's army with millions of soldiers or to choose Krishna himself. And of course, Arjuna representing us, the devotee, aspiring towards God. Arjuna says, that's easy. I choose you, God. Because with God, with Krishna, victory is assured. And Duryodhana, king material desire, as Lahiri said, he was so happy to have those millions of soldiers. But worldly power is nothing against spiritual power. However, worldly power has its influence, and darkness has its influence. And if we allow ourselves to become hypnotized by the world and be drawn out time and again to what we want, what we think is going to make us happy, or towards selfishness, or towards the senses, or towards, wine, pleasures, everything, and we think, oh, this will not harm me. But what happens is that there's magnetism in our lower chakras, and if we start indulging them, they will gain their own power. Yogananda told us there's a power moving towards the light, and there's darkness that pulls us down. And if we indulge the darkness, if we think that we're safe by, I'll just skip meditating for this day, for this week, for this year, we may never come back. I'll just have these few glasses of wine. I'll just, cheat these few people in my business. It has its own magnetism. And worldly environment has its own magnetism. And the more we immerse ourselves with people of worldly consciousness and people with negative tendencies that want to pull us down, they will be able to pull us down if we don't have a strong enough counter power to pull against it and to war against that. And so, thoughts and emotions, they flow around us like radio waves. And we have to ask ourselves, these thoughts, they're not individually rooted. What goes through our mind, these thoughts, they're universally rooted. It's what's flowing through us. So the question becomes, what am I attuning my radio channel to? Am I attuning to negative traits, selfish tendencies, greed, anger, arrogance? Or am I attuning myself to the consciousness of my guru, Am I tuning myself to other like-minded spiritual seekers? So satsang is so important. Yogananda said, environment is stronger than willpower, and people are one of the most important aspects of our environment. So choose our friends wisely and choose our environments wisely. In this Why Devotees Fall story, weekly commentaries from the Bible, the story is the infamous story about the fall of Judas. As you know, one of 12 disciples of Jesus, so he was obviously a very high advanced soul to be one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, and yet he fell hard when he betrayed Jesus to his death, and then of course after he realized his great error, he took his own life by hanging. And the way that story goes is that Mary, who was also Jesus's disciple, came to a dinner where, if it was 2,000 years ago in ancient Judea, you realize that, the men were probably having dinner and the women were probably cooking and not really with the men while they're having dinner. And Mary comes in and has this very expensive, very scented, fragrant oil and starts washing Jesus's feet right there in the middle of this big scene, and then dries his feet with her hair. And it's such a, intimate act of devotion to Jesus. And, I'm sure everybody was sort of startled and looking around, but she didn't care. She knew that this was her guru, and maybe deep down in her heart, she knew he wouldn't be around for long. And so Judas, who thinks Jesus is just wrong for allowing this woman in, let alone she did have a reputation of being a courtesan or a prostitute in previous years, Judas thought this was so wrong of this great master to allow this woman to defile him, and said, how can you let her do this? And, this expensive spikenard ointment could have been sold for so much money and given to the poor, and how do you allow this? And Jesus says, let her be. And, the poor you have always with you, but me you have not always with you. So Judas is rebuked also publicly, and then Judas, not long after that, does betray Jesus to the authorities. But what was Judas's downfall? He was looking at social norms. What will people think? What is my guru doing? I think I know better than my guru. Let me tell him what to do. My guru is not being practical. Why is he acting like this? This is when the disciple thinks he knows better than the master. And, that sort of a rule may apply to others, but it doesn't apply to me. Or the guru does something that is unexpected, and it just doesn't fall into the way we think things should be. So we lose faith in our guru. And so this is a big, big fall for Judas. And Jesus, on the other hand, he knew what was going to happen. He knew he would not be there for long, much longer on the material world, and he would be killed soon. And he allowed Mary, this very close disciple, to show her devotion. And it was a very intimate moment between disciple and guru, and she just was laying her heart at his feet. And he allowed it. And so when we think of that moment, there's a phrase that says, pride goes before a fall. So pride is one of those negative tendencies within us that precedes a fall. And so we want to be sure we work against that pride. But really it's between worldly power and spiritual power. There's always this battle within us, the soul's aspiration for spiritual oneness and the ego saying, no, I want worldly things fulfilled, or I want this worldly power. I want people to think good of me. Sort of like Judas, what will these people think? And so let's remember that we are not safe until we're anchored in God. And why do we seek God? Why are we seeking him? Why try so hard and fall and try again? Because it's our soul nature to seek God. And why do we keep falling? Because God is the most relishable. Being one with him is the ultimate goal in life. And that prize is not so easily won. It's simple to be one with God, but it's not easy. And so we know that this flow of energy, we need to keep strong. We want to stay in the flow of energy, using our spiritual aspiration, just assertive aspiration towards God, because we don't want to just kick back and think, it will happen. Because if we're not putting out the energy and moving towards God, it's almost certain that we're sliding backwards. And we'll just go into perhaps passive spirituality, but then delusion can start to take over. So let's put out the energy. We come from God. We will always return to God. There's no way we can fall indefinitely, but let's put out the effort and do what Arjuna did, choose God before the millions of other opportunities that we have to get other things, to get those millions of soldiers. Let's just choose God, because God will bring us our victory.
We can choose, as Daya said, to gaze into the darkness, or we can choose to gaze into the light. Swamiji said, the way to victory is not to pretend the pull of delusion doesn't exist, rather to live in the thought of God's presence within, to meditate and to offer one's life as a channel for divine energy, love, and joy. Implicit in this warning of the Gita is the related promise. From concentration on spiritual ideals comes the desire to live by them, which develops into yearning for truth, and then total absorption in divine consciousness. From such absorption comes forgetfulness of the senses and worldly ways of thinking. Separation from worldly consciousness results in the complete annihilation of delusion. A friend of mine, when he was a teenager, took up wrestling. And he was saying how all of the other boys really wanted to learn new holds to overcome their enemies, their opponents. But the instructor kept emphasizing and spent most of the time having the boys bridging, that is, to develop the same muscles that we use to do the bridge pose in yoga. And because he said that especially at the beginning, you're going to spend a lot of your time being thrown onto the floor. And what are you going to do about it? And you need to learn to push up and push your opponent off to be able to stand up. And once we've been thrown to the floor, what are we going to do about it? How long are we going to lie there until we push up? Swami Vivekananda, as you know, went to visit America in 1893, the same year that Guruji was born. And Guruji went to America in 1920. And in between those two, Swami Ramatirtha, a great yogi, also went to America in 1902. He was a sannyas. He traveled around America for 2 years with no money, no luggage, but made a deep impact. And one of the women he met told her story. And she said she went to him for spiritual counseling. And she went in the room and he was meditating. And she didn't quite know what to do. And then she just started telling him her problems. And he kept his eyes closed. He didn't seem to respond. And to her, he just seemed really cold and arrogant. And she said, "Are you even listening?" And then when she finally told him all her troubles, he opened his eyes. And he gazed at her and he said, "Mother, Om, Om." And then she describes what happened. She said, "From his eyes, I felt a new consciousness. I felt I was mother of the universe. Now my joy never leaves me. Om is reverberating through my bones." With his realization, he was able to transmit that reality of truth. And what she had been feeling, all of these emotions she thought were very real. With all of her pain and suffering that she expressed, and then she realized that no, these feelings were not real, were not lasting, had no lasting effect. And we can call on that same higher consciousness right now. Every time that we hear the words of truth, every time we open a book of a realized soul, every time we practice Kriya Yoga, we just need to go back to that inspiration, maybe a little more often, maybe staying there a little longer. Guruji said, "Darkness can't be driven out with a stick. Turn on the light. Darkness will vanish as if it had never been. Don't try to drive darkness out of your mind. Instead, simply turn toward the light." When we gaze at our desires or weaknesses, it becomes confused and complex. If gazing towards the light, we move from that complexity to simplicity. There's the story of the man who was walking along and he saw a little frog on the road. And the frog said to him, "Help me, help me." He said, "Oh, a talking frog." He picked up the frog and the frog said, "Help me, I'm really not a frog. I'm a beautiful princess. If you kiss me, I'll become that princess." He put the frog in his pocket. And then he heard this voice, "Help me, help me. Don't you want me to be that beautiful princess?" And he said, "No, at this stage in my life, I think I'm happy to have a talking frog." Yogananda Ji said, "The average man, when a desire is fulfilled, he's happy. When a desire is denied, he's unhappy. And when he's neither glad nor sorrowful, he is bored." And in that boredom, we may think, "Oh, I feel empty. I might as well just marry that beautiful princess. Or maybe I should buy a big dog too, and make my life really complicated." This is how the mind works. And gazing at the light, concentrating on simple truth, meditating, serving, these are the actions that give our lives the meaning we might have been looking for in that beautiful princess or the dog. It's not what we do as much as our attitude. Yoganandaji said, say yes to life. Treat each moment as fresh and new and creative. And one never gets bored. He says, sing the songs that none had sung. Think thoughts that in brain have never rung. Walk in paths that none have trod. Weep tears as none have shed for God. God always has some spiritual lesson for us, and it's always right in front of us. And what is it, for instance, that you notice around you that needs doing? Maybe it could well be yours to do. Be it such a simple thing, picking up a piece of paper, washing a window. But can we do it completely absorbed in that divine consciousness? Can we do it as if we're serving, as if we're giving? We're not doing it mechanically. And we've grown up in a materialistic society, and it's very easy to think, oh, this is just a piece of paper. This is just a window. It's only work to be done. There's no deeper meaning I can get from this. But we can retrain ourselves to serve with the consciousness of the divine flowing through us as we clean that window, and call on the divine to come through us as we face this difficult problem. And I find myself often forgetting this. In an office, it's easy to forget and maybe treat your colleagues in a brusque way or unkindly just to try to get the job done. Or as a parent, you might discipline your child, in a rough way, not being sensitive. Or in business, we can slip into the old mentality of thinking, I need to do this to earn money or to get the job done. Instead of asking, how do I bring God's consciousness? How do I bring a divine solution into this problem? Let me just turn on the light. Finally, there's a story that a devotee, he lived in Texas, an Ananda devotee, and he had a dream of Swami Kriyananda. And he had the dream, as it turned out, just when Swamiji left his body in 2013. And the man said he said he had never had a dream of Swami, but in the dream, it was very vivid. He and Swamiji were holding this long pole, and he was at the front end, Swamiji was at the back, and Swamiji was pole vaulting, and they were running together. And this man put his end of the pole into the hole in the ground, and then Swamiji started to go up with the pole. And the man said he just didn't know in the dream if Swamiji would make it all the way over. And then he heard Swamiji calling, and he said, I'm going over now. And then he woke up. And it was only some days later he learned that at the moment that Swamiji left his body, he had this dream. And so let me leave you with that.